Today we're looking at potassium. Okay, let me just share this screen. Okay. That's just the motherhood statement about potassium, most abundant intracellular, an essential nutrient, blah, blah, blah. Potassium is present in all bodily tissue. Yep. Maintains in transmembrane electrochemical gradients, the gradients of the sodium, potassium. And then potassium has a strong relationship with sodium, which we know, the main regulatory of extracellular fluid volume, including plasma volume. So obviously plasma volume is in the arteries. The total amount of potassium in the body, the adult body, is about 45 millimoles. So kilogram of body weight, which basically, let's say we were looking at somebody that was 70 kilos, which is 2.2 to get to pounds, 154 pounds. Okay, times 45. That's in millimoles, or in terms of grams per pound. In that regard, and that 175, in order to get the kilo amount, is somebody nearly 80 kilos. That's the amount inside them. Okay, let's move on. Most potassium resides intracellularly inside the cells, and a small amount extracellular, which is basically in the bloodstream. The extracellular concentrations of this different form of transmembrane electrochemical gradient that is maintained via the sodium potassium. So that's sodium potassium ATPase transporter. So basically that's just, it catalyzes. So it sort of, what it does is it will take, it'll basically hydrolyze off phosphate, turning ATP to ADP, and pretty much use the energy from that catalyzing action or chemical action. So that's how it's getting its energy for this to maintain all that. In addition to maintaining cellular tonicity, which is basically that gradient again, which is basically the sort of the osmotic movement of fluids. Anyway, not important for what I'm focused on. Is required for proper nerve transmission, muscle contraction, and kidney function. Potassium is, now this is the stuff we really want to know. Potassium is absorbed via passive diffusion, primarily in the small intestine. Our lovely, that's where all the fat and all our easily available energy comes through. Wonderful. And about 90% of ingested potassium is absorbed and used to maintain normal intracellular and extracellular concentrations. So inside the cell and outside the cell in the bloodstream. Potassium is excreted primarily in the urine. Nothing like pissing out some potassium. Some is excreted in the stool. It varies quite a bit. And a small amount is lost in sweat. And the operative word is small. Like magnesium, you can't really lose much. The only stuff you really lose heavily out of out of sweat is sodium, and you know it because you can lick your arm on a hot day and it will taste quite salty. So yes, in that regard. So pretty much you don't really have to worry about the issues with potassium or magnesium, because if you're getting enough in the diet, the body will excrete what it doesn't want, hold what it needs to, and as long as you've maintained that gradient, that means having sufficient sodium, because the body can get rid of sodium as long as you keep insulin down. As long as you keep insulin down and you're not, because the biggest problem is when you eat carbohydrates, what do? One, you need a lot of these electrolytes and all that as cofactors and whatever else. A lot of micronutrients to literally metabolize carbohydrates. So that puts a bit of a strain on the whole system. And then on top of that, you've basically also retaining water. And I've stated this many times. It's about 3.8 grams for every gram of sugar. So there's plenty of water retention. And what happens is, the body literally goes into, if you're drinking too much and you've got high insulin, you've got, electrolytes all over the place. The body's going to be trying to excrete a lot of these fluids and all that. And you're going to be pissing like mad. And that's what happens with diabetics. They piss like mad. People with high insulin also piss like mad. And so, the body's just put under strain. So a lot of these problems are when you're having an inappropriate diet, a species inappropriate diet. That's when you get all these problems. You don't get them when you have a proper species appropriate diet. Anyway, this is another reason why vegetarians can get away with very low electrolyte intake, because by eating so much sugar, they push insulin so high, the retention is just massive in that regard. And so if they don't actually drop the actual electrolytes to some extent, they will actually push up blood pressure very rapidly because of that retention of fluids that high insulin does. It's the reason why, people like, the fruitarians and people like that, they don't need electrolytes. That was only, it was a high sugar diet, which he knew as well. You couldn't sustain that for a very long period of time, but basically the diet didn't require, it was minimal electrolytes, whatever was in the system or whatever you're getting from food, no supplementation of electrolytes, and pretty much just an iron supplement was provided. That's basically it. And that sort of explains, the high insulin issues with when it comes to, with a high sodium or low sodium or high potassium or low potassium can create a lot of these blood pressure issues. Anyway, plus, a lot of these diets actually tend to cause issues with people's kidneys in the long run. So that also causes plenty of problems and all that. So let's get back to it. Okay, about 90% is ingested, as I said earlier. Potassium is excreted primarily in the urine, and some is excreted in stool, and a very small amount is lost in sweat. So we need to remember that. So anybody that tells you the sort of crappy sort of stuff, only sodium gets excreted in the sweat in large amounts. It's one way of getting rid of it. Kidney controls potassium excretion in response to changes in dietary intake, and potassium excretion increases rapidly in healthy people after potassium consumption, unless body stores are depleted. So the body will actually get rid of potassium. This is why people stop, you know, in a lot of countries, they banned potassium supplementation because people basically were supplementing too much and causing themselves heart attacks, you know, so heart failures. So pretty much it is dangerous. Get it from your diet and allow the body to regulate and excrete what it doesn't need. The body knows. It's been doing it for a very long time, guys, you know. So don't listen to the crackpots out there. They will get you killed. You know, when you go to the hospital, you don't see doctors running around shoving, you know, IVs in your body, trying to pump you full of potassium. Now, do they? No. What are they pumping in? Saline water, sodium, hydrated or whatever, or you got issues. They're pumping in the salt. So wake up to yourselves. You know, it's crazy how the intervention in emergency care, when you fucked up, your diet and fucked up, or everything else is massive amounts of you know, of salt water. Oh God! And then you go to your GP and he goes, "Oh, you should be on a low sodium diet. Really unhealthy for you, all this sodium." Talk about a disconnect. Anyway, let's move on from that nonsense. Kidneys can adapt to variable potassium intake in healthy individuals, but a minimum of 5 millimoles, about 195 milligrams potassium, is excreted daily in the urine. So that's the bare minimum. So if you're not getting enough, the body's going to go, "Ooh, we're going to hold on to it." You know, like remember with the magnesium, how much the kidneys recycled back and just lost very little. Exactly the same sort of stuff. The kidneys are there to basically say, we better, you know, not excrete as much. And that's all, you know, this combined with other obligatory losses suggests that potassium balance cannot be achieved with an intake of less than 400 to 800 milligrams a day. So that's because you got about 200 you're getting out of your pooper, and your kidneys nearly 200 out of there. So at the bare minimum. So at most 800. So way below the full. So, you know, so if you're downing, you know, massive amounts, it's all going to go out in the pooper and it's going to be urinated out. Why? Because it's too much. Unless you've got a deficiency, you know, you've been depleted because you've been doing crazy stuff for a long time, you know, been on a sad diet for a very long time or something like that, and had been eating Doritos or shit like that for a very long time and was getting very little of the stuff. Yes, then your body will probably retain more of it, probably need a bit more in those initial stages to basically get to the levels that are the healthy levels. So, you know, that's the key thing, the take-home message. The body will do quite a bit to maintain it. And normal serum concentrations of potassium range from 3.6 to 5.0 millimoles and are regulated by a variety of mechanisms: diarrhea, vomiting, kidney disease, use of certain medication, and other conditions that alter potassium excretion or cause transcellular potassium shifts, can cause hypokalemia, that means too low, and hyper, they always use the O or the E whenever you see that, that means higher. Otherwise, in healthy individuals with normal kidney function, abnormally low or high blood levels of potassium are rare. And that is the definite case. They are bloody rare. Okay? So most problems are with people that have got renal problems due to diabetes, you know, stuff like that. That's another reason why they've got high blood pressure and a whole lot of other issues, because they've got dysfunctional kidneys. They really should be on a ketogenic diet to fix their kidney problems. But yes, try getting a doctor to put somebody on stuff like that. You know, this is another reason why dialysis, is cropping up everywhere around the world for these reasons, because people are eating too much sugar, unfortunately. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, estimated requirements. So potassium requirements have been evaluated. So this is the sort of the PubMed, the sort of official book on the electrolytes. So this is sort of like the NIH sort of their booklet or book that it's online that basically gives, it comes out of an actual big hard book. These are just pages out of it that actually discuss all these different things, or, sodium, chloride, all sorts of things. They go through and pretty much focus on that sort of stuff. So let's just focus on this. Potassium requirements have been evaluated in only a few studies, and that is true, or through losses on a low or minimal potassium diet are small. So what's that actually saying there? Or through on a low or minimal potassium diet are small, the losses. So even people, kidneys, if they're in good working order, they'll try, if you're not getting enough, they'll fucking try and keep it in. Potassium is well conserved. Oh, sorry, because potassium is less well conserved than sodium. That's sort of true. If you're deficient, the body's going to do everything it can to try and actually hold on to it. Let's put it that way. So it's just the modern diets that really deplete a lot of this sort of stuff. Fecal losses are less than 400, and renal losses are between 200 and 400. So the 200, the other sort of, whether we're looking at the amount, 195, well, 200, yeah, give or take. And you'll always get a varied amount from fecal. So it depends, if you're not consuming a lot in your diet, you're not going to get a lot of fecal loss. It seems that it'll actually shuttle in, and then the kidneys will sort out how much via the signaling, how much to basically keep there. So these are just values that have been estimated by this study going back 1959. So that would have been a sort of a mechanistic study where they gave people, they basically then collected their feces and urine for the day. They would have them in a clinical setting, and then they'd work out how much they excreted. And so, as you can see, people can vary quite a bit. Anyway, other losses in sweat are negligible. So it's quite clear we don't lose much in sweat. On the intake, about 20 MEQ days, which is, as you can see, that's about 800. So this is the sort of levels. So metabolic balance is achieved at the expense of reduced body potassium stores. So if you've got reduced potassium stores and you're providing your body with, so you've come out off a bad diet, a sad diet, you're providing your body with about 800 milligrams, so double that, then basically you'll be fine. Metabolic balance is achieved. Okay. And in some cases with reduced plasma levels, which is really, that's quite low, that's about 200 or whatever. So the body, these are different values that they've actually picked. But there's never been a study where they've looked at the genetic differences between people. So I think there may be, but I can't prove it. And yeah, so to maintain normal body stores and a normal concentration of plasma and interstitial fluid and intake, so that's, in your cells and stuff like that, and in the tissue of your body, pretty much is what they're saying, and plasma. You need about 400 MEq per day, and so that is 1600. Therefore, it would appear that a minimum requirement is approximately 1600 to 2000 per day. Now, that was the original belief, to basically, so, if there are issues that that there could be a number of issues that could affect the amount in your system. So this was a sort of a requirement that they had actually put, even though they admit that only 800 is excreted. Okay, so they admit at a maximum 800 is excreted, but they're telling us we should top up to this amount. And all this information comes from this later study. So basically, this is the NRC study. And these are basically studies that are coming at a time when we have been on, since the 70s, we've, probably had a decade, we've been on, high carbohydrate diets, a lot of refined carbs and shit like that, which burn through potassium. So magnesium and potassium, you will need far more to basically oxidize, sugars. And as a consequence, this is why I think they moved to these levels with this study. And there is considerable evidence that dietary potassium exerts a beneficial effect in hypertension, and the recommendation for increased intake of fruit and vegetables. Yeah, our vegetarian mates are telling us, we've put you on a high carbohydrate diet, we've induced hypertension because of fluid retention and high insulin, so we recommend you basically go for these higher levels because you need it in your diet. And then they followed on. The follow-on was basically, we went to these sort of levels, which is 1300 milligrams per day would rise potassium intakes in adults, So from these fruit and vegetables. And so because that sort of happened, the sort of fruit and vegetable bullshit, what happened was they used that as an excuse to say, oh yeah, it seems that, because remember, when it comes to the RDIs, they work on the averages and they go, oh, this sort of average seems to be okay. It seems to be working. So, let's stick to this. And now that people are even worse health-wise with higher blood pressures and all this sort of stuff, they've doubled down, and now it's 4,700 milligrams per day. Next it'll be, 10,000. These people are just crackpots. It's just basically, rather than actually admitting that the higher you push the carbohydrate content, now with seed oils and pretty much, fake meats, we're going to be nearly 100% plant-based. If we move in that direction, obviously, your insulin levels and your water retention and all that, and water logging is going to be so high. Yeah, they'll go, the 4,700 level will go even higher, because basically, that's their only solution. Keep up, push the potassium even higher. to try and bring down blood pressure. It's not a very smart thing to do because it causes a lot of dysregulation in the body. And also it increases sarcopenia and increases osteoporosis because you end up excreting even more sodium. And sodium and good quality protein are needed, are critical to good bone and muscle health. But that's for another day, which I'll be covering that. But this is a sort of situation we're in. Now, let's take a look at some foods. Come on. I hate when this does this. Go away. Switch to foods. Okay. We're going to go to meats first. Yes, let's look at meats. Again, we're looking at the 100 grams, which is 3.5 ounces. And let's say, I'm going to have 2 meals a day. So I'm going to have a bit of bacon, Canadian bacon. Fuck, they're doing up in injecting the little fuckers with potassium. I'm just kidding. So let's just go for a standard pork chop. Pork, I'm not going to have 100. I'm going to have about 500 grams, I can tell you. We'll just go for the 16 ounce. So we'll go for a 16 ounce, which is 3 grams per ounce. So that's 453. So that's a good size steak. Divided by 100 times the 428. There you go, nearly 2,000. You're pretty much covered, aren't you? Remember. And that's just from one meal. Okay. So 1940. So I got 1 meal in. Let's say I just had bacon, So I usually have about 250. Sorry, 200. So that's 2 times 499. That's nearly 1,000. Every day I have a glass of milk. That's me. So where are we? Dairy. Okay, we'll go down here. I'm not even going to bother looking at, cheese and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's 2 fried eggs. So I'll just use that. So at a minimum, I'll have 2 eggs. So 152. So I've had my bacon, I've had my eggs. And then at lunch, at afternoon, because usually that's earlier. It's usually on the weekends. So I'll have some brie. And there's the milk. So let me just copy that. And so that's, I'll actually go for that, even though I have raw, and raw actually has the pasteurized stuff has far less. The raw milk has far more potassium. But so I'm going to go with the lowest, even though it's I usually have a glass of milk, which is 5 raw milk, 500 mils, which is just slightly, I think it's about 17 ounces or stuff like that. per day. So times 5 plus the other amount. And as you can see, 2,000, well covered. Okay. So just remember that 750. And where's the brie? 150. I'm just going to go 100, 150. I usually have some sort of cheese. Sometimes I have camembert. Sometimes I'll have some of these other cheeses. So I'm just going to stick to the 150. I have sometimes goat, which is much higher. I'm just going to stick to that just as a sort of a base. And I usually have about 100 grams per day, which is about 3.5 ounces. So, okay, when you're looking at some fish, I do like snapper, but I'm not going to pick that right now. So I'm going to go to the yellowfin tuna. So when I have yellowfin tuna, it's usually about, for me personally, it has to be at least about 400. So that's about 4 times 4. Oops, 441. What I do there? Fucked up. 4. So it's about 1,800. Oops. I'll put the cheese in there. So as you can see, it's nearly there in that regard. So let's go for some other meats that I did not cover. No, we're not looking at emu steaks. So ribeye, 383 times 4.5. As you can see, 1,700 plus add the cheese. Nearly there. You know, if you add the bacon as well, stuff like that. As you can see, you can get quite high. Plus a 750 when it comes to, for me, for milk, and I'm already at 2,600. And if sometimes I'll have bacon. And sometimes I'll have Greek yogurt. Fairly high. So I've pretty much covered the steak. I've covered the milk, and then the yogurt, which I have about 250. So that's 26. We'll just say 2,600 for the 2, 3, 4 times 2.5 plus 2,600. So as you can see, it's well over 3,000. So I'm normally anywhere between, per day, about 2,500 to over 3,000 is my normal intake. So it's way above the minimal requirements of excretion, let alone the sort of theoretical made up stuff of possibly needed to prevent hypertension. Unlikely to be an issue with me with my low insulin and low sugar. So, I mean, I've shown you before my blood sugar and stuff like that. So I'm not going to fucking bother with that sort of shit. And I don't have any strips because I brother-in-law anyway. So as you can see, my requirements are more than covered. And it's absolutely a non-issue, guys. It's a non-issue. and stop fucking worrying about it. And if you keep the sodium up, your body will get rid of that extra, and don't over fucking hydrate. Drink when you're thirsty. Your body will tell you. We're not meant to. I mean, no tribal population goes around drinking liters and liters of water, because all you do is dilute those electrolytes, and basically, you look at wild animals, you look at animals like domesticated animals. I mean, I've sort of looked after goats in Greece as a youngster. My auntie's dad's sister up in the mountains. And so, when you look at their urine, it's yellow. Everybody's, there was, I can't remember who actually recently mentioned Tim Noakes, because he actually wrote a book about shit. And as I said before, because it's high deuterium, and even Laszlo Boris he's against it. He says you need to hydrate with fat. Keep sugar down. It dehydrates you. And I've explained this on multiple occasions, how it dehydrates you. You need to upregulate your antidiuretic hormones. You need to keep your insulin down, and you need sodium and support with good nutrition, your kidneys and everything else with good fats. You need good levels of and do not fear salt and do not fear fat, because they are your friend and they will keep you healthy. They will keep your body functional and keep your electrolytes in balance. And that's pretty much it on potassium. As you can see, it's more bullshit, different day on our requirements. The reality is and our body conserves if we don't get enough. And most of us, if we eat a species appropriate diet, get more than enough. So it's just more bullshit. I mean, when you drop the fluids, because you're dropping insulin, everybody's blood pressure goes down. The only people that basically in like low carb when they're doing something inappropriate, is sort of inducing what is called like rabbit starvation, and they're scared of fat. And as a consequence, they end up basically, not being able to utilize, they don't have sufficient fat to support those enzymatic pathways. And as a consequence, they tend to have, for some reason, like that, have fallen for some of this nonsense that, more protein, sort of things. Yeah, fine if you want to be a bodybuilder and all that. But the general people just need good levels of, quality protein, but you need fatty carbs. Otherwise, you induce rabbit starvation. When somebody in the low carb community or carnivore community tells me, "Oh, I'm getting diarrhea eating meat," you're not eating enough fat. That's why. That's rabbit. That's one of the symptoms of rabbit starvation. Another symptom is basically high deuterium levels. So what do? You urinate like mad, like diabetics do. So, that's what happened to carnivore yogi. Same thing. Too much protein, not enough fat. So you induce a sort of a rabbit starvation sort of situation. I mean, old Stefansson knew that years ago, that you got to basically get in the fat. That's the biggest problem in the sort of the carnivore community. People are eating too lean. I like my meats. You've seen my meats, big fat pieces like that, chunky fat pieces like that. It doesn't have fat on it. It's not meat. It's some bullshit thing. that some, industrial system sort of set up. And if you don't, go to a butcher, tell them to cut big, thick amounts of fat on them, because that's a sort of sausages, cured stuff, remember, which are made in the traditional way with a lot of salt. They will protect your colon. Remember the rats, eating bacon, salted bacon, kept the rats very healthy. So, just use your brain. What have our ancestors been doing for a long time? Been living close to riverbeds and the sea in order to access sodium. It's a very important electrolyte. So we've covered this in terms of potassium. You guys now understand sort of the minimum requirements, the excretion rates, and everything related to it. So stop worrying about your potassium levels. You do not need to supplement. Just eat species appropriate food and you'll be fine. Simple as that. Anyway, have a nice day. See you guys.